All right, let's jump right in. We're going to be talking about one of the most foundational phrases in Islam, the seal of the prophets. Now, for most people, that phrase means one thing, the end. But what if it means something completely different? What if it's not a closed door, but actually a key?
So let's start with that big question. What if the end isn't really the end at all? What if a belief that's been held for centuries is based more on tradition, on assumption, than on what the core text itself actually says? That's the rabbit hole we're going down today. So, first things first, let's lay out the baseline. We need to talk about the belief that is, well, it's almost universally accepted as a given.
For the vast majority of Muslims, this is a central pillar of faith. The idea is that the Prophet Muhammad was the very last messenger, the final word, and when he passed away, that line of divine communication to humanity, it was just closed for good. This is our starting point, the common understanding.
But then, our source material for this explainer just drops this bombshell. The claim is that this core belief, this absolute final end of prophecy, is never explicitly stated in the Quran, not once. And that single point, well, it just blows the whole conversation wide open. So, okay, if the seal isn't an ending, then what is it? The source we're looking at proposes a pretty radical shift in how we think about this. It's asking us to step out of the world of finality and into the world of law. Think about it in a legal sense. When a king puts his wax seal on a document, he's not saying, "This is the last document I'll ever write." Of course not. He's saying, "This one is official, this is the authoritative version." A sealed document becomes the standard. It authenticates the content, it protects it from being messed with, but it doesn't stop other documents from being created. It just means that any new document is going to be judged against the sealed one. And this right here, this slide just lays it out perfectly, the two competing ideas. On one hand, you have the chronological meaning. It's about finality, a closed book. And on the other, you have the juridical meaning. It's about authenticity, a sealed document that becomes the controlling standard for everything that comes after. And this is really the core argument in a nutshell. It's a fantastic little mantra. According to this view, the whole point of a seal is to guarantee truth, not to impose silence. That is a really powerful and memorable distinction. Now look, for this whole legal interpretation to have any weight, you've got to find support for it in the Quran itself, right? And the source material argues that the evidence, it's been hiding in plain sight this whole time. This verse is the big one. This is where the phrase seal of the prophets actually appears. And what's fascinating is the context. It doesn't show up in a passage about the end of the world or the final judgment. It's in a chapter dealing with very down-to-earth legal matters like adoption and marriage. The source argues the context itself is juridical. It's legal. Then the analysis points to verses like this one, which describes the different ways God communicates with people. Now notice what's missing. There's no expiration date. It tells you how God communicates, but it never says when that communication is going to stop. And the Quran is just full of examples of God's ongoing action in the world. I mean, you have inspiration given to a bee, God actively guiding the hearts of people who believe, and this idea that every single nation has received a warner. These are all presented as continuous, universal truths, not things that just stopped happening at some point in history.
So here's the critical observation, the real linchpin of the argument. The doctrine of this absolute, permanent finality. It's an inference. It's a conclusion that people have drawn from the text. But, and this is a huge but, according to this analysis, it is not a direct statement in the text. The source argues that a belief this massive would surely require a direct, unambiguous declaration. And that, of course, raises a huge question. If the Quran doesn't explicitly say prophecy has ended, then where does this nearly universal belief actually come from? The source material points in one direction, the Hadith. And just as a reminder, these are collections of reports about what the Prophet Muhammad said and did, and they were compiled by scholars centuries after his life. This brings us to what the source calls a logical paradox, and you gotta follow the steps here. 1. The Hadith, which are human collections, declare that prophecy has ended. 2. That's a claim about what God will or will not do in the future. 3. But only God can reveal his own future plans. So 4. A revelation from God about his future plans would itself be prophecy. You see the problem? It's a classic catch-22.
This table does a great job clarifying the source's position on where the authority lies. The Quran claims to be divinely protected, while Hadith scholarship itself acknowledges this whole process of human collection, filtering, and grading. And on this specific issue, you see the split. The Quran defines a seal of authority, while the Hadith declare a chronological end.
The source then brings up verses like this one, arguing that the Quran itself seems to warn against prioritizing other reports, other hadith, over God's own verses. It appears to set up a very clear hierarchy of authority. So after all that, what's the final picture that this analysis is painting? Well, it's not a dusty old archive with the doors locked and bolted shut. It's more like a living, functioning, and very much open courtroom. So the big takeaway here is that the seal of the prophets isn't a door slamming shut for all time. It's more like the judge's gavel coming down, establishing the law of the land. It gives us the ultimate, unchangeable standard, the Quran, and any future claim of truth or divine guidance has to be measured against it. I love this line from the source material. It just sums it all up perfectly. You can have a protected, authoritative, and final scripture without having a silent, retired God. The two things are not mutually exclusive. And that leaves us with this final, really provocative question to think about. If the Quran establishes an authoritative standard, a sealed document, but never explicitly declares God's silence, then who exactly has the authority to stand up and declare that the courtroom of divine guidance is permanently closed? It's a question that really makes you think about the very source of authority itself.